A new political alliance has been created to save Tunisia following President Kais Saied's power grab last year. The National Salvation Front is set to unite political forces, re-establish constitutional and democratic processes and guarantee freedoms. Saied, who was elected in 2019, sacked the government, suspended parliament and seized wide-ranging powers in July last year. Now he has given himself authority to elect members of the Electoral Commission. Critics say this is an attempt at dictatorship. Joining us now to unpack that is Sami Hamdi, the Managing Director of International Interest, a global risk and intelligence company. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Did the surprise resignation of Nadia Kacha, second governor of Carthage on January 24th, signal the writing on the wall? I mean, when she talked about those differences between herself and the president.
I think that when it comes to Nadia Kacha, I think it's first and foremost important to highlight that her relationship with Kais Saied is believed to have deteriorated from the moment in which an incident took place in which her brother was embroiled in a situation with the police, and Nadia Kacha in the middle of the night left her office, went to the police station and got her brother out. Kais Saied believed that this, when it got leaked to the media, put him in a very bad light at a time in which he was trying to insist to the people that he was fighting corruption, and it appears from that moment onwards that the relationship with Nadia Kacha began to deteriorate. The second point to note is that there are two main factions around Kais Saied who have been competing with one another. The first, of course, was Nadia Kacha when she was Chief of Staff, a powerful woman with significant influence, somebody who used to sit in even on the National Security Council and listen in on the meetings and offer her advice, and somebody who's considered as one of the architects of the overthrow of parliament and the seizure of power by Kais Saied. That's on one side, and on the other side, you have the Interior Minister, Tawfiq Sharfuddin, who his removal from his position from Interior Minister was what sparked or what provided was the straw that broke the camel's back that made Kais Saied sack the government and refuse to sign any laws from Parliament, given that Kais Saied had insisted to the government as part of this sort of negotiated settlement that Tawfiq Sharfuddin would be the Interior Minister. Nadia Kacha since has gone to Paris and she's launched a scathing attack on the palace, a scathing attack on Tawfiq Sharfuddin, a scathing attack on those who are around Kais Saied, accusing them of usurping the direction of what she calls the rectification of the democratic process, albeit I believe it to be a coup. But the point being is that this is part of this escalation between the different factions. But when you look at the overall bigger picture, the reality is that Saied is continuing to storm ahead with his roadmap, storm ahead with his reforms, and it appears that these statements and the like do not appear to have caused him to stumble in any way.
Well, clearly not. But are we surprised this man took over, President Saied, in a coup? Are we surprised at the accusations of autocracy and dictatorship that are emerging?
I don't think we should be surprised. Kais Saied, for 2 years before he embarked on his coup, kept stating that he wanted to change the constitution, that he wanted to rule with executive powers. The executive powers under the constitution are given to the government and the parliament. Parliament is supreme. Kais Saied wanted the presidency to have those powers. Kais Saied sought to strong-arm parliament and threatened early elections if they did not go his way and give him the government that he wanted. Remember, he appointed Ilyas al-Fakhfakh, who was brought down on charges of corruption. He appointed Hisham al-Shishi, the very prime minister who he then sacked in order to seize powers for himself. The idea being that since then, Kais Saied has taken decisions unilaterally. He suspended the constitution unilaterally. He declared emergency rule unilaterally. Even Article 80 that he called upon that allows him to declare emergency rule, Article 80 states quite clearly and categorically that, quote, Parliament is to remain in permanent session and any extension to the emergency may not be taken without consultation with the Speaker of Parliament and the Prime Minister. In other words, Saied clearly contravened the Constitution. In September last year, he announced that he would start ruling by decree. In January, he announced an electronic forum in which he would begin writing a new constitution. In February, he announced his own roadmap in which he said there would be a referendum in July and then elections in December. And last month, he announced that he would be making changes to the election laws and has started unilaterally appointing members to the election committee, whilst also forming his own High Judicial Council after after struggling to get the courts to indict his political opponents that he's been dragging before political courts. If all of this does not indicate autocracy, then the reality is I don't know what does.
Well, what's very clear is that he is on a warpath to staying in power. But we now have the National Salvation Front, which is this new alliance that seeks to save Tunisia. Unpack for us how this is going to happen and what that strategy is.
I think, first of all, we should look at the National Salvation Front for what it is. The reality is that it reflects a move away on the part of the political parties, a move away from a demand that Parliament be restored, that the suspended Parliament be restored, and is more a reflection of a change of tactic in which the political parties or the main opposition of Al-Nahda, which is the largest party in Parliament, with Qalb Tunis, the second largest party, with Karama Alliance, the third largest party, they've decided to lend their way to what I call a softer coup. A softer coup being that Najib al-Shabbi, who is heading the National Salvation Front, Najib al-Shabbi supported the suspension of Parliament. He supported the overthrow of Parliament. He believes the Constitution should be changed, and he believes that the Constitution should be changed without consulting Parliament. In other words, the principle of the coup is something that Najib al-Shabbi, the head of the Salvation Front, agrees with. The reason why the political parties have decided to support Najib al-Shabbi in spite of his support for what can only be constituted as a coup is that Najib al-Shabbi's vision for the coup differs from Kais Saied. Najib al-Shabbi envisages that the Parliament remains suspended, it doesn't return, that the Constitution be changed, but that it is done via a national dialogue that includes Al-Nahda, that includes Qalb Tunis, that includes Karama Alliance, i.e. it includes the largest political blocs, whereas Kais Saied is pursuing a hard coup in which he unilaterally writes the Constitution, unilaterally runs elections, unilaterally writes laws, and unilaterally rules by decree. The idea being that the parties, given that they've been unable to mobilize people on the streets to reverse the coup, and given they've been unable to force a restoration of Parliament, have chosen to support this softer coup in a bid to try to survive in a political environment in the midst of a coup that shows little sign of relenting. And this is why it should be National Salvation Front with a question mark in the end, primarily because it is now a case of, as Johar bin Barak, the head of the primary organization that organizes the protest, called Muwatinun Didd al-Inqilab, Johar bin Barak told the radio that now there is no return to pre-25th of July, i.e. before the coup. Essentially, one of the loudest advocates for the return of Parliament has now stated there will be no return of Parliament, and this is what I mean about the shift from calling for Parliament to supporting a softer coup. But the reality is that the National Salvation Front is still made up of a political elite that is derided by the Tunisian population. And herein lies the tragedy of what is unfolding in Tunisia, in that even if you convince a Tunisian that the coup is wrong, even if you convince a Tunisian that Kais Saied is becoming a dictator, even if you convince a Tunisian that they are going down a dangerous path and compromising their democratic transition, you cannot convince the same Tunisian that the best solution is to go back to a parliament that they believe has failed consistently over the past 10 years to deliver on the aspirations of the Arab Spring. And this is why that not enough people have taken to the streets, in that even if they do not like Kais Saied, they do not want to see the return of a parliament in its current form. And that's perhaps what has pushed the political parties to support this National Salvation Front, to go towards a national dialogue, to accept that parliament might not be returning.
If you allow me to come in there, we're all too familiar with coalitions and how invariably coalitions, within coalitions, cracks start to unravel. Is there any guarantee that this coalition will stay and be able to pull through with their given mandate?
I think it's important to highlight that even before the question of whether they're able to maintain their alliance together, whether they're actually able to impose themselves even in the first place. The reality is they don't have the power to impose themselves. But supposing that they do, and let's go along with the question, the reality is that we've seen this before. We've seen this National Salvation Fronts formed before. In 2014, when there were mass protests that tried to ride the momentum of Sisi's coup in Egypt to deliver a coup in Tunisia, a National Salvation Front was formed, which then transformed into a political party called Nida Tunis. Nida came first in the next elections, parliamentary elections, and once they became the largest party in parliament, they rapidly disintegrated until it became ungovernable, until the party no longer existed, and the party was not even able to run effectively in the 2019 elections, and they were almost effectively wiped out. The idea being that this alliance has been brought together by multiple ambitions that do not entirely, that are not entirely in harmony with one another. And the reality is that for the likes of Najib al-Shabi and these others, those who have failed consistently in the elections, the idea of the National Salvation Front is to impose themselves undemocratically, to force through changes in the constitution that they would not be able to achieve democratically, and then secure positions of power that they would not be able to secure democratically. The resonance here being, for those who remember, that Marzouki, the first president after the Arab Spring, was never elected. He was a negotiated president who was put in power, and when he faced elections in 2014, he was defeated. The idea being that Najib al-Shabi may well be aspiring to something similar, being the head of a National Salvation Front. Given that he's unable to win elections, he might negotiate for himself a position as the new president of Tunisia in the very remote event that somehow something overturns Said's coup.
Sami, before we let you go, just very quickly, have 60 seconds left to chat with you. You certainly talk about the constitution and this desire by both parties to change the constitution. Very quickly, tell us, what are the fundamental changes that they want to implement in the constitution?
The fundamental change in the constitution that Said and Najib al-Shabi and the others want to change is they want to remove the executive powers from parliament and restore a powerful presidency. They want to restore a constitution or election laws that benefits Islamist parties. They believe that there are some laws that benefits the Islamist parties. They want these laws changed to ensure that any democratic process that takes place gives them a disproportionate representation in parliament, as opposed to the current system, which is a proportionate representation. They are frustrated that they keep losing elections. They are frustrated that Ennahda keeps winning, and they are seeking to alter the constitution in a manner that ensures that Ennahda doesn't win and they win instead.
Sami Hamdi, certainly appreciate your time this evening and unpacking those issues for us on what's transpiring in Tunisia, where President Saied is fighting to cling on to power.